Welcome back. Hey, this is episode number 7. We are glad you are here. This is the Unleashed podcast. And remember, we are the resistance. So last week we had a special guest, a really close friend of mine. His name was Roger Medley. There's all kinds of things that this guy has been in his lifetime, and I have so much admiration and respect for him. But before we bring him back on, it's kind of funny. He was in the military. He did a lot of flying. He was in a lot of the different, venues, and I'll let him tell you about some of that stuff. But being that I get to travel quite a bit, I get to be on planes frequently. And I told a plane story a few weeks ago where we had a mechanical issue with the rear thruster kicking on a mid-flight. But I was flying, I think I was going to Traverse City, Michigan. And as many of you know, I do a lot of speaking for wild game dinners and things like that. And so does our guest today as well. And I'll let him tell you more about that as well. But so I'm flying up there. And when Roger and I first met, it was because we were connected through a pro staff we were on together called God's Country Camouflage. Well, the venue that was having me speak that night, they literally were picking me up at the airport and driving me straight there. Now, I never just wear a full camo outfit, but I had to go right to this thing, no time to change. So I wore my camo on the plane, which I don't normally do. So as the plane takes off, I'm sitting beside this woman, and she's like over against the window, and she has these little cat eye glasses and pearls. She's very distinguished looking, and she's reading some really big, thick, deep book. And as we get up to altitude, they say we can put our tray tables down and everything. So I do, and I get in my camo backpack, and I pull out this bow hunting magazine. And when I open the thing up, she begins to look over, and she's seeing these different animals, that these guys have harvested. And I could see her kind of scoot a little bit closer to the window away from me. She was a little bit, uncomfortable. So as the flight attendant comes back, to give us drinks and peanuts or whatever they were doing that day, he asked me, he said, "Hey, would you want some peanuts?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love some peanuts." So he gives me some, and he says, "Man, would you like some?" She goes, "Yes, please." So he goes to pass them across me to give them to her, and they fall out of his hand, and they fall right on a picture of this dead bear. She looks at me, she looks at the picture, she takes her fingertips and just gently picks the peanuts up, and she starts to turn away from me. And then she turns back and she looks at me and she goes, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" And I'm going, I know this is going to be good. She said, "What exactly do you do for a living?" I was like, "Seriously?" And I said, honestly, I was in the music industry for about 25 years, and I did a lot of touring in music. I said, and now I do a lot of working in the outdoor industry, in the hunting world. And she looks at me and she goes, "Oh my gosh, you're Ted Nugent." No, what's funny about this is when Roger and I first met, it was at the archery trade show in Indianapolis, and he and I were on a break, and we were walking around, and we went by Ted Nugent's booth, and there was a huge banner up there, and it had Ted, and Roger looks at me and he goes, "Dude, you do look like him." So, and he wasn't at the booth for a moment, so I stood up at the booth like I was going to be answering people's questions. And Roger, you have a picture of that somewhere, don't you?
I do.
Oh, if you've got that, get it to me. Maybe we'll put that up on this podcast. That'd be hilarious. But again, before we get into this stuff, I just want to remind you, if you are, finding us on Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to give us a follow, a like, rate, a rating, and subscribe to what we're doing here. So without further ado, right, Roger, I do have an incredible amount of respect for you, not only as a man of God, husband, father, all those things, and a really good, kind of a, what is that, the bad dad jokes? You're like the king. Hey, give us a bad dad joke real quick.
Okay. Did you hear that the scientists that figure out how to weigh a rainbow, somehow they figured it out. I don't know how they figured it out, but it turns out, so the big question is, how much does a rainbow weigh? Turns out pretty light.
I told you this guy is...
There's probably a prayer request in there. There's a prayer request in there somewhere.
I have a lot of questions about your childhood, Roger. I'm not sure here. Hey, speaking of questions, Eric, we had a question come in before we get into this.
Yes. This question is from Kayla from Cleveland, Ohio. How do I motivate an underperforming employee? I really like him personally, but I need more out of him.
Well, first of all, she's from Cleveland, and I'm a Steelers fan, so I promise to be nice. So she's got an underperforming employee, and she's wondering, what was it again? How do I get him to?
It said he's underperforming, likes him personally, but she wants to motivate him because I think they're heading towards where a possible termination is, and she wants to salvage him. So
yeah, here's what I would say. Never we start a sentence with, how do I get someone to? You're going down the wrong path. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've even had, someone's wife call me and say, hey, my husband isn't meeting these expectations or doing what I want. How do I get him to? And it can go both ways, husbands and wives. But whenever we start that sentence with, how do I get someone to? You can't, okay? You can't make them. The thing is, until they see their need to change, until they really know that they need to change, they're just not going to. And let me tie that together real quick with something interesting here. When we think about trying to get someone to, what did it take for you to change? Well, here's what I know. Until I'm convicted about something, until I know my need to do something different, I'm not changing. But once I see my need, because I've been convicted of it, and this is what this guy needs to see, okay? He needs to see his need for it. He needs to be convicted of it, that he needs to be doing something different, because conviction is a beautiful thing. It leads to two things. It leads to repentance and obedience. So there you go. I mean, really, until he sees his need for it, nothing's going to change. He has to be convicted of it and stay in the game with him, love him where he's at, but have good, healthy boundaries with him. Sometimes we do love well by having to, draw those healthy boundaries. It's loving him well by doing that. So, well, anyhow, let's go back.
Before you get started, you want to remind the people how to send us questions?
Oh, yeah. We love getting your questions in. You can send those to podcast@unleashed.men. And, man, bring them in. And as we go through these episodes, especially if they pertain maybe to what we're going to be doing that week, we'll make sure we hit those. So anything else you can think of before we rock on?
Nope. Let's rock on.
All right, Roger, we're going to rock on with you. So I mentioned about having a lot of respect for Roger. He shared in our last podcast, he had gone through, different military schools for survival and evasion, all these different things. But that was for a reason, because he was a trained soldier. That's what in the military. That's what he was. And as we begin to talk about the different things he had been involved in, I don't know if you're like me. When I was a kid, and I would watch different war movies, there was something as a kid that it caused me to want to step up. Right? We would play, cowboys and Indians. That's what we did. That was the culture back then. We played an army. We played war. We would, whether it was pine cones or apples, or we would pretend we'd be lobbing, grenades at the bunkers of the enemy because, again, we talked about being dangerous for good. We all wanted to know that we were dangerous, someone to be reckoned with when we were kids. And whenever I see someone grow up and find their place who literally is willing to lay down their life for what they believe in, and Roger is one of those guys, so I want you to listen to him. Man, I have an incredible amount of respect. So, Roger, kind of go back. I was glued to the television back in 1991. Many of you, if you were around, you remember that. It was the very beginning of the war with Desert Storm. And I remember President Bush going on there. As we got back to the hotel room, I was with a group called One, and we were recording an album in Nashville. And I walk into the hotel that night, and I see him on there, and you see the opening of all these, there's tracers going up in the sky and missiles being fired. It's an awesome thing and it's a terrible thing. And sometimes it's a needed thing. But Roger is one of those men who heard the call and walked into it. So Roger, man, I know you got some great stories. So, man, you just go.
If we can go back to the question real quick, when I was COO of a little tech company here in the Colorado Springs area, the Proverbs tells us, my people perish for a lack of vision. Sometimes employees need to understand the vision. And sometimes it's just that simple. Sure, we have folks that just don't want to engage, but my first question to this boss would be, does your employee understand the vision? Truly understand the vision. Anyway, I was stationed in North Carolina at Pope Air Force Base in Fayetteville, North Carolina, right next to Fort Bragg. At the time, we had 4 gates on Pope, and 3 of them dumped you out into Fort Bragg, which is no longer called Fort Bragg anymore. Somebody got a little upset about who Mr. Bragg was and his past, so they changed the name of it. But early August of 1990, I think it was probably a day or 2 after Saddam invaded Kuwait, we got the phone call that said, hey, get your stuff, we're leaving. And literally, probably 95% of the base deployed over into the Middle East. Lots of amazing stories, we could share and talk about, lots of memories. And frankly, it was a time, I was a single dad at the time when I deployed in early August of 90. And knowing what I've, experiencing what I did and how I saw God work, both in my life and in the lives of many, countless others, I would go back to the desert again in a heartbeat to get out into a place like that where, lives are changed and forged and friendships are made. Man, I would embrace that again. I was gone about 8 months for that deployment, going from Desert Shield into Desert Storm.
Hey, Roger, for those that don't know the difference, real quick, tell them the difference between Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
Sure. Desert Shield really was the buildup of troops. We were literally some of the first to get there. I started out in Thumrait, Oman. We called it Thumbscrew because literally we were in the middle of the desert of Oman. And there was a base there that had for years pre-deployed things, trucks and tents. And so we landed and they said, hey, you guys are in crew rest. Go finish putting your tent together. And it was, 115 degrees and the wind was 30 miles an hour and the tent was flapping. But Desert Shield was all the deployment, the initial getting troops in place, all the buildup. It included, if you remember, there was a big sweep of troops that really started way out west in Saudi Arabia and made the big sweep from the west, or they headed north and then they turned to the east. So they were coming from the west. That's what our job was. We were hauling beams, bullets, bombs, fuel, people. We were landing on a road up there along the Iraqi-Saudi border. Desert Shield lasted until mid-January when what was called the Air War started, and that's when it switched from Desert Shield to Desert Storm. And essentially, the U.S. and coalition forces just bombed the snot out of the Iraqis, both in Kuwait and in Iraq, for about 6 weeks before the ground war started. And so that really is the difference. Shield was the preparation and the movement of troops, the placement of troops and resources, and then Storm was when we started blowing stuff up. But so we got there and we were flying literally all the time, hauling stuff around from early August and literally until mid-January. but there was a very significant, a couple different significant things that happened while we were there. And, boy, what's the right story to tell? There was perhaps for this episode, I guess, the most impactful time for me was during Desert Shield. There was a squadron of F-15 Strike Eagles from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in northeastern North Carolina that was stationed there. Also a squadron of British Tornado fighters. And there was an F-15 and a Tornado out, doing some practice stuff out in the desert. And the one thing about flying in the desert is there's no trees, right? There's really nothing to give you any sort of sense of how high you are, just the horizon. And it can be very, very deceptive. And that F-15 that was doing some mock dogfights with that Tornado ended up crashing into the desert and killed the pilot and the radar nav, or bombardier, I guess you could call him, the backseater. And the interesting thing was, 3 days before that incident, I'd been praying with that backseater. A good friend of mine, the chaplain, Stu Smith, he knew the front seater and the back seater of that F-15 because he was from their base, and he had to go out and identify the bodies. And a couple of days later, we go out to fly a mission, and we were literally hauling everything, literally bombs, bullets, ammo, fuel. This one particular morning, we show up at the airplane, and I walk into the cargo compartment of our C-130, and there's two big metal boxes. Our mission that day was to begin the journey home for these two airmen. We get into these situations in life where, we depend upon one another. And we can isolate ourselves, or we can embrace, a phrase that now that my youngest son is going through SEAL training, he and I, we use this phrase, embrace the suck.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, God is the author and finisher of our faith, and he works all things to our good. I believe that. He loves us, so I believe it. And anyway, we get into these situations where we depend upon one another. We have these memories of men that we've served with, or we've done life with, whether it's in a men's group or a Bible study or church or something like that. And I remember going back to a time when I was in C-130 school as a flight engineer, and went out to, I was not a believer at the time, but I went to a bar called Checkmate in Little Rock, Arkansas. Select a Slut, Select a Mate were the names used for this particular bar. And we got there early. A guy by the name of Damon Kanua and we got there early. We stayed all night. We were there until last call. I drank so much alcohol that really alcohol poisoning would have been, the reality, except God intervened in my life that night. And so we go back to the dorm. My roommate, who was a believer, had said, "Hey, Roger, I went and checked out a church." And this is like, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the morning after stumbling in from the bar. I never even got drunk that night. I mean, it wasn't because my tolerance for alcohol was high. I absolutely believe that God intervened. This guy, Kurt, said, "Roger, I went and checked out this church, talked to the pastor today. I'm going to go on Sunday. Do you want to go?" I was in the midst of, a separation, which ultimately led to a divorce. My first wife had an affair. I didn't really like the idea that she had a boyfriend, so we split up. And it was really 2 weeks later, I was playing guitar in that church's band.
Wow.
But so where does Damon Kanua come into this? During Desert Storm, there was an AC-130 gunship. Damon was a flight engineer stationed in Hurlburt, Florida. He was a flight engineer on AC-130 gunships. And those things are, boy, you're talking about an amazing airplane. From 10,000 feet, they can hit a football in the middle of a football field.
Yeah, that's nuts.
That's the airplane that orbits at 10,000 feet and blows up everything. 105 millimeter howitzer cannon on the side of this airplane. Well, during Desert Storm, there was a gunship that was shot down. Damon was on that airplane. They were dead before they even hit the water. We go through times. We've got men in our life. Things are forged. Friendships are forged. We've got to learn to rely on others. We've got to be willing to walk with others, right?
Yeah.
And Brent, I know there was a time when a guy I know ended up walking with you during one of your times of meeting somebody.
Yep.
Can you tell us about that?
I shared just a tiny little bit when I told my story on one of maybe it was 2 weeks ago in that episode about my own personal shipwreck. But yeah, when I was at my very bottom, I'll never forget when I told this man my story. I was broken, and he just looked at me and he said, "It's a good thing the real you didn't do that sin." And I went, "What? I know what I did." He says, "No." He says, "You don't understand. It's a good thing the real you didn't do that sin." And then over the next 10 years, he would mentor me, and I began to understand, like I talk every week, identity, that the real me is Christ in me where there is no sin. So at the core of who I am, and that's coming back to what you were talking about, he really taught me that no matter what the sin is in our life as a believer, I have God's righteousness because I could never do it on my own. And here's the thing, God doesn't, he wants us to rely on him. He doesn't want us to do all this, stuff here on this earth alone. And he gave us friends, right? He gave us brothers in Christ. That's one of the things that, like with Roger and I, he got a hold of me a couple of weeks ago when his son was graduating from Navy boot camp up in Great Lakes, Chicago. And he texts me right before the thing, and he goes, "Hey, here's a live feed so you can watch the graduation." He and I are friends. Now, friends doesn't mean that we always just have these great adventures. There's been times when we've had to say things to each other that we needed to hear. Times he's had to come back and say, "Brent, this is something that I need to bring to your attention." And I am so thankful because I was blind to some of the things that I was doing, but he loved me enough to step up like a man and say, "Hey, it doesn't change our relationship, but I need you to see something here." And he was right. And Roger, I want to take this, you and I, we've had all these, great adventures in hunting, but there was one, and we talked in the last episode about going to Poison Pass area where we have been hunting, and we got surrounded by all the water, and I got hypothermic, and you guys helped me get out of there. Well, here we go. Once again, Roger to the rescue, kind of like Popeye. We were down in this same gully, right? As we talked about last week on the episode, and it rained. I think it was for like 17 hours, if I remember. We're under these tarps again. This is a year later than last week. This isn't the same trip. I'm glad, Roger, you're here so you can verify how dumb I can be. But he has these tarps, and we're under it, and it rains for like 17 hours. I logged this. Well, my pack was out from underneath the edge of the tarp. I'd been sleeping, curled up and not realizing that water had kind of, balled up at the bottom of this tarp, and it had to run off somewhere, and it just happened my pack was there, and so it fills up my pack. And once again, I packed the kitchen sink as always, and now my pack weighs about 80 pounds. It's stupid, crazy stuff. Well, one of the things that I had done and didn't want to tell them, because these guys, both former military guys, I messed up my water filtration, and he had got me a new water filtration unit, in the inline one that comes right out of the pack and out of the camel that I've got on my back. And I'd messed it up, and I couldn't get it to filter water. Well, last year I was trying to be in shape, and Roger takes off, so I'm wanting his respect, and I didn't want to tell these guys that I had messed up my water filtration, so I just didn't say a word about it. Well, we realized we got to get out of there. We're soaked. Again, the mud is nasty. We're going back up those switchbacks to the very top again. And we get maybe halfway up. I had nothing left in the tank. I had nothing. I was getting dehydrated, but I didn't want to say a word about it. That whole man thing. I don't know what that's true or not, because I always complain to my wife. She'll be the first one to tell you, women are so much tougher than men. They go through childbirth and hardly do a thing, but you men, you get a cold and you think it's the end of the world. It's true. But I was trying to get their respect, so I'm trying to tough it out. And we get about halfway up, and I go over to Roger, and my thumbs, do you remember this? They were curled into my palms, and I said, Roger, can you open my thumbs? And he bends them back, and he goes, dude, you are dehydrated bad. He said, you know what? We're not going to try to get back and get dry stuff. We're going to go into town about an hour away. Let's go get a good meal, get you some water. Maybe we can throw our muddy clothes in a washing machine at a hotel, and then we can make another trip of it tomorrow. So we get to this little Italian restaurant in Pagosa Springs. I remember that. And huge glasses of water. I downed 3 of them. I was so thirsty. Well, when you get dehydrated, you don't just rehydrate by drinking water really fast. It's because it takes, really, from being a singer, I can tell you, it takes about 16 hours. Like, if I'm going to be singing for a session, I used to be a musician, sang in the studio a lot. It takes about that long for water to really hydrate you so that you don't get dry mouth and all that. So I drink all that water. I think I'm going to be good. We get back to the hotel room. The next morning, we wake up. We go downstairs to the little, breakfast area just outside of the main lobby. And we're sitting there eating. And I looked at you, Roger, and I said, man, who burned the waffles in here? Because there was a waffle maker. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, man, it's smoky in here. He goes, there's no smoke in here. I said, huh? You're kidding me. I said, I go out to the lobby, and the manager was standing there, and I said, is there a fire in the building? Did someone burn something? And he goes, sir, there's no smoke in here. Okay. So I go as fast as I can back up to the hotel, second floor. Take the stairs. I get up there. I look in the mirror, and if you've ever gotten out of a really hot shower and you can barely make out your silhouette because it's so, steam on the mirror, I can barely make out my own image now in the mirror. So those guys get up behind me, and they said, hey, dude, what do you think's up? I said, I don't know. So they helped me get on the phone. I call my doctor back in Indiana. We're in Colorado, and I had a female doctor, and she says to me, she goes, you need to get to the ER. I said, no. I said, we're on a hunting trip. We've got all this time and energy invested. She goes, do you want to die? I said, seriously? She goes, I think you're having a stroke. So by this time, the guys realized that it was really serious. And so they walk me, one guy on each side of me, down to the truck. And by this time, I can still see a little bit. I could see the curb to step off of it. They get me to the emergency room in Pagosa Springs, and they walk me in to the emergency room. And as I'm standing there, and they're over there kind of getting me checked in, this nurse walks over to me, and I guess I'm facing a wall because I can't see anything at this point. And she says, sir, I need you to look at the eye chart on the wall over there and tell me which line you can read. And I said, what wall? She goes, you can't see the wall? I said, I can't see anything. So she comes walking out. A minute later, she goes, stay here. She comes back, and she has something. She says, hey, we need to get a urine sample from you. We need to see what's going on here. So she says, I'm going to walk you over to the bathroom. Were you guys standing there when this happened?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll never forget this. It's like the line when I was getting hypothermic, and you're like, hey, if we can't get your body temperature up, we got to put you between us in a sleeping bag. And this nurse walks me over and she goes to take me into the bathroom and she goes, "Do you need any help?" And I hear this laughter coming from the back. I said, "I think I got this much." So,
Brent, if I can just interject here real quick.
Yeah.
One thing that was going through, and this is maybe the sick part of Roger, but I was thinking, if she's going to help him, I'm gonna dump a big gallon thing of ice water right in his crotch right before she goes in here.
It's like getting out of a cold pool. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's like, what if I miss the cup and get it all, But so I finally, I don't know about you, but like in the middle of the night when I need to go to the bathroom, I leave it pitch black. I know like every step, where the door handle is, the frame of the door, you get used to that. But anyhow, I don't know why I even brought that up. I think about that sometimes because I honestly think about this. If I went blind, would I still know my way around the house, right? So you kind of learn to measure your steps where things are. But you never think that's going to happen to you. But here I am in Pagosa Springs in the emergency room, and I am blind as a bat. I can't see anything. So they walk me down, they get me in an emergency room bed, pull the curtain, and pretty soon 2 doctors come in. And they said, "Hey, we got the results of your urine back. Your urine is brown. It's not yellow, it's brown. And you've got something, it's called rhabdomyolysis, if you want the term. And for short, they call it rhabdo. They said we actually had 2 hunters die of that this year that came in. They got so dehydrated that what happens is your organs begin to eat themselves. That's what happens. They just begin to deteriorate and eat themselves. And they said if we can't get your fluid levels back up within about the next 16 hours, you're going on dialysis." And I'm like, whoa, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't see this coming in a million years. And so my pride, because of that, here I am, not wanting to tell anybody what was really going on in my life. And so, because the water filtration, what would they think of me? So they get me into a hospital bed for a couple of days, and I can't see anything. I can remember the television being on, and it's when the Pope visited the United States, and I can remember hearing that on the television. And a doctor comes walking in, and he kneels down beside the bed. And Roger had stayed with me the whole time with this thing. So this doctor walks in, and he rolls my eyelids back. And first he says, "Hey, can you read my name?" I said, "Sir, I can't even see you." He says, "Really?" And I said, "I can't see a thing." So he rolls my eyelids back, and he goes to do something, and he jams his thumbnail right into my eyeball by accident. And I'm telling you, I've had root canals. That was right up there with. I had a root canal one time that had a double nerve in it, and they got the shot in the one and missed the other one, and he goes right down with that raw nerve. That'll light you up. But he does this with his thumbnail, and the worst part about it was he's going to be putting some drops in my eyes to dilate and do something with my eyes, and whatever the injury he caused me when he put his thumb in there, he put those drops in. I think in the next 6 hours, I must have hit my pain button that you have in the hospital bed probably a dozen times, saying, "I need pain medicine. This is the worst thing I've ever felt." But so they finally, I'll tell you what, when you are in that situation, you have no idea what you're going to feel. We talked about feelings, and you begin to think thoughts that are creating these bad emotions like, what if I can never see again? What if I can never see my kids again? What if I can't do that thing that I'm called to because I can no longer see, which requires me to be driving and flying and doing adventures? What if I can't do any of these things? Those what ifs. And, that's where the enemy loves to get us. He loves to give you those past and future thoughts. What if I can't? It creates all kinds of anxiety, worry, fear, doubt, all these things, which is exactly where he wanted me. He didn't want me to be able to see that God had a plan, and God was doing part of his plan that day through my friends who were there with me, that walked with me and didn't leave my side no matter what. So after, I don't know how long it was, eventually I get my eyesight back. I was in there for a little while. And when the doctor discharges me, he says, "Now listen, here's the deal. I don't want you going back out there elk hunting." And I remember raising my left eyebrow and looking over at Roger, and he's like, "Oh, geez." And he says, "Okay, if you do, Roger, you got to keep a good eye on him." And Roger's like, "I got it." So we did end up going back out and going hunting for another day or so before that trip was over. But when I go back and I look at all this stuff, I had a friend that really did stick closer to me than a brother. And when you find yourself in those situations, we're always so worried that we're going to be left alone. but you were never alone, ever. And I know, Roger, when you talk about some of these instances, when you said you knew God was with you that one night, you knew he was there. You had drunk all this alcohol, but you weren't drunk, and you said you knew God was working a plan. And that's exactly what he does. Sometimes he'll do it in a divine way where no one else is around, and we see it happening only by the hand of God. And then sometimes the hand of God chooses someone else's hand that he's going to put in yours to walk you through these storms, like Desert Storm that Roger went through. Now, we all have storms. You cannot get away from it. But we have a God who knows everything about you, everything. And because you did good things, he doesn't love you anymore. And because you've done bad things, he doesn't love you any less. His love is constant. You are his beloved. Raj, is there anything that you want to add to that, or you had time to kind of sit back and listen to that?
Yeah, there's maybe a couple of things. There was a part of that if you remember, when we got to Pagosa Springs, it was late in the day, so we opted to stay in a hotel that first night and then go into the backcountry the next morning. Whatever you ate that night didn't agree with you. And so when we started off heading into the backcountry, you were already dehydrated. And so for me, the illustration here is, you were dehydrated when we started. Rhabdomyolysis comes from a combination of high physical exertion and the combination of high physical exertion and dehydration, right?
Yeah, I've seen marathon
so
runners.
You were already exactly, and actually, I mentioned my youngest son Jake's going through SEAL training, the prep portion of SEAL training, and there's another potentially future SEAL that had rhabdomyolysis that he was telling me about a couple of weeks ago. But the point is here's a little thing that happened. There had been, I mentioned in the last episode that part of the state of Colorado gets a whole lot of rain. And so the streams where we were getting our water were not running clear, they were muddy. And so that's why your filter got plugged up. Mine was actually pretty plugged up as well. I was on the last bit of water when we made it out. And so we were all dealing with, some degree of the same kind of circumstances with our equipment starting to fail because of the dirtiness of the water. Point is it was, you had a stomach issue before we got going. You were already behind the curve. And then, like you mentioned, your pride got in the way. And, it doesn't get in, I know you now, it doesn't get in the way with you anymore. So you've learned. That's a cool thing. But for me, what I didn't do is I didn't pay enough attention to all the little things that you were going through. I've lived out here for more than 20 years. I know dehydration is a big deal. I thought I had tried to, pay attention to that for you. And clearly I didn't pay enough attention. And so, for you, I apologize for not doing that. But to be able to stand there with you and, and watch what God was doing, man, such a privilege. When we walk with others, it's a privilege.
Yeah.
It is nothing short of that. And
when
for the guys that want to do it solo.
Yeah, no, I was going to say when someone allows you to be in and there's that trust formed, that's a bond that will never be broken.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you mentioned, you and I have locked horns on some various topics, and frankly, it's for me, and I know for you as well, it's never been, well, is this friendship going to continue or not? but that question's never entered my mind.
Yeah. Same.
It's, what's God doing here? Let's figure it out. Am I wrong? Are we both wrong? Which is probably,
and this goes back to this whole episode with the whole pride thing. We can only be that person when we swallow our pride, when we swallow our need to be right. If I have to be right, I've already lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Iron sharpens iron, right? We quote that proverb many times, but what happens when iron strikes iron? There's sparks.
Yeah.
There's forging. There's all kinds of stuff that goes, God's bigger than us. Let's just submit to him and let him teach us. How about we do that?
There's two sayings I'm thinking about. I was watching a podcast recently, and I love this quote. It says, "It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war." And that's the one thing I love. When you and I get together, we talk. We are prepping for battle because we know it's coming. We absolutely know those storms are going to be coming back at us in all kinds of different ways we don't even know are coming, but we're prepared. And the other quote that I heard, and I think I have this right, I think it was, and if I'm wrong, tell me, I think it says, strong men create good times create soft men, and soft men create hard times. I think it's so important that we look, even what's happening in this culture, this world, this country right now, we've become soft. We become incredibly soft. We are now entitled to everything. And the problem is men don't want to go to each other and admit what's really going on behind closed doors in their life right now, because a man, one of his top thing, his needs is respect. We want that, like I talked about. My pride got in the way. But it's only when I can humble myself with someone that I trust, right? Let me just kind of say this. I want to wrap up here. But this was a quote from, I think I have it pretty close to right, but my friend John Lynch wrote a book called The Cure. And he says in this, he says, imagine a place so safe that we could tell the worst about ourselves and actually be loved more, not less, for the telling of it. When you have a brother like I have in Roger, and pride no longer needs to get in the way because I don't have to have his respect, and likewise, we can really not just confess our sins, but we can confess our temptations, the areas that the enemy is hitting us with, and that is so key. So guys, I want to invite you, as you finish up, if you're driving wherever you are right now, let me ask you just this one question right now. Do you have a brother or a band of brothers that you walk with, that no matter what, you could share anything you're going through, and it would be a safe place where you're not going to be judged, where someone is trying to fix and control you, like the one question we had at the beginning, how do I get someone to, right? It's not about trying to get someone to, it's about learning to walk with someone so the Holy Spirit can help them know what they don't know yet, and when they're blind, they can't see it. The Holy Spirit helps you see what you can't see. He promises to stick closer than a brother. Roger, I am honored to have you here. We will be lifelong friends, and I look forward to see what God's going to be doing.
Brent, I can't say with enough emphasis how excited I am for you with the podcast, with all the ministry, the amazing things that God has used you to do. Like I said, it is such a privilege. We're close enough that I get to see what God is doing. And it is such a privilege. I'm honored to be, on a couple of your episodes. And I look forward to what God's going to do in and through you in the coming days and months and years.
I agree. Can't wait to see what God's doing in you and what he's going to be doing through all these guys. So let me just leave you with this, guys. God is creating a strong man in you. So when you have these trials that are coming, remember that he is forming you. He is making you fit for the kingdom. It is better, again, to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. He's made you for this time. Your strength is needed. Stay unleashed.